look for what your body is telling you. Your body will give you signs. It will give you signs on the outside that something is wrong on the inside. And what I want to take you through today are the 7 main symptoms of mold sensitivity before you know that you even get it. Welcome back, everybody. Glad to have you here. Today, we're going to be talking about the 7 main symptoms of mold toxicity. Why this is important is because there are so many people right now with debilitating dis-ease of the body. So they're dealing with all of the symptoms of a body that is not balanced, that's not healthy. But when they go to their PCP, they go to their specialists, they're finding that they can't actually get diagnosed with something, right? Or they might eventually get diagnosed with the autoimmune issue, but they don't know what the underlying root causes are. So the reason for this topic actually came about, I was doing a podcast interview, a webinar for another health-related company. And I was talking about what we see in our practice as signs and symptoms before someone even knows that they have mold toxicity or a stealth pathogen. I can mention those again in just a moment if you're unaware of those. Or before they do, they even think about doing any testing. Look for what your body is telling you. Your body will give you signs. It will give you signs on the outside that something is wrong on the inside. And what I want to take you through today are the 7 main symptoms of mold sensitivity before you know that you even get it. Okay, so here's what stealth pathogens are. Stealth pathogens are many of the underlying root causes that cause disease many years down the road. So think about them like from the gut. Okay, there's parasites, right? Those are invisible on the outside, right? They give you symptoms though. We've talked about those. I can link up many podcasts on this. There's yeast overgrowth or candida overgrowth, a fungus not dissimilar to mold, but we can talk about that. There are H. pylori bacteria. There are viruses. There are heavy metals. There's gut permeability. So there's all sorts of things that can be invisible on the outside, right? You don't know that you have them, right? You don't look necessarily too much different on the outside if you have these things, but you're suffering. And some of those symptoms I'm going to share with you here today. And of course, one of those other stealth pathogens is mold. And mold is very easy to be exposed to. For the majority of people, you will be exposed at some point during a year to mold. Could be in a hotel room, a water-damaged office or home, or even the outside environment, especially in the coastlines, right? Especially on the East Coast or even the South. So mold grows between 40 degrees and 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So when you look at that, it's pretty opportune. And it can grow on any and all organic matter, which is essentially what it feeds off of. The only thing it needs besides that is a little bit of moisture. So many people live in a home or rent a home that has had water damage in the past. So it's had a leaky, let's say, water heater or air conditioning unit, or the bathtub overflowed, the sink overflowed, the dishwasher overflowed, and they have mold. And they're breathing it in unbeknownst to them because not everything shows up as black mold on the outside. Oftentimes that's behind drywall or in the ceiling or in the ducts. And so one of the ways that you can actually look for it and test for it is actually in the dust of your home. Now, I'm sure your home, just like mine, there's no dust at all, right? We can always say that, but you can actually, the spores, which are essentially invisible, can be in the dust. It's one of the reasons why I'm a huge advocate of air filters in your home. All the products I recommend, everything is always at stephencabral.com/resources. So take your time, feel free to look through what I use in my family and in my private practice and recommend to people. Doesn't mean it's the right fit for you, but I vet these companies. I know that they work. I don't own any of those companies. The only company that I'm affiliated with is Ecolife, of course, which I formulate for. But we're not talking about any of those here today. What I want to share with you, though, are those symptoms. So that's when you can start to go looking for it as well. So we're going to get started right now. The first symptom that many people have, especially in children, that's overlooked is asthma. Now, asthma itself is not overlooked, meaning difficulty breathing, catching your wind, as they say. That's not overlooked. People get diagnosed with asthma all the time. But what is overlooked are the underlying root causes of asthma. Keep in mind, every dis-ease of the body has an underlying root cause, every one of them. And so with asthma, mold can be one of them. Here's why. Mold is often inhaled as a spore. That means it you're breathing in through your nostrils and it goes into your lungs. And when it settles into your lungs, well, this is a dark space with moisture that can harbor those spores and enable the mycotoxins, which is essentially the metabolites, the waste from the mold, to continue to proliferate and disrupt the immune system. Okay, so all of these things come about from an immune response. So as I'm giving you the 7 symptoms here today, understand that almost all of them come from inflammation. And that's why I tell people all the time that inflammation is not a root cause. You want to look for it, but if you just squelch the inflammation, what happens? That doesn't mean that you get rid of the root cause. So yes, help with the inflammation through natural means while looking for the root cause. So if there's mold in the lungs or spores in the lungs, and the immune system goes to attack those mold spores that shouldn't be there, it creates inflammation as it's attacking them. And that inflammation then makes it harder to breathe. So what does conventional medicine do? I almost made the mistake of calling them modern medicine. What does conventional medicine do? They give steroids. To what? Decrease the inflammation. Okay. Temporary fix. Great if you need it at the time, but that is actually now allowing then more of that mold to just sit there and not be attacked by the immune system. So there has to be a deeper plan. All right, the second symptom is allergic rhinitis. So if you're exposed to mold, you breathe it in to the nostrils, and it's very interesting because it can lead to what seems like allergies, right? And you can say, oh, I have an allergy to mold. Yes, agreed, right? You can say that. Your body reacts to the mold. There's no doubt about that. Some react more, but it creates nasal congestion, sometimes sneezing, sometimes watering eyes, sometimes an itchy nose that you play off as allergies. However, it can be mold, not necessarily a sensitivity to dust, right? Might have a sensitivity to dust, but actually what you might be sensitive to is the mold in that dust. Important to look at that, especially if this comes on spring and fall. Now again, yes, those are time when the leaves are falling and all of that in the fall, but look at what else we have. When the leaves fall, they decay. We need mold in nature. Believe it or not, we need it. And the reason is mold helps to decay and decompose living matter. It breaks it down and then it goes into the ecosystem, into the earth. Well, leaves fall off in the fall. They begin to decay and mold, especially in the New England area. But then in the spring, they're covered by snow all winter. They get moist. They get moldy. What happens? The snow melts and now you're left with moldy leaves. Important to get those leaves out of your yard during the fall-based season. Okay, that's allergic rhinitis, mold spores in the nose instead of the lungs. There's another one, hypersensitivity pneumonitis. Now, why this is important as well is that instead of the hay fever that we just kind of spoke about or the diagnosed asthma, you can actually lead to shortness of breath and over time, lung scarring. So it starts to take it to that next level. And I think that that's pretty important to look at, that if this becomes chronic, there can be issues with scar tissue being built up. So if you ever get that diagnosis from a doctor, a pulmonologist, it's something worth looking into to see if you may have exposure to mold. Sinusitis, kind of going back to the allergic rhinitis, but when we say sinusitis, we're typically talking about inflammation of the sinuses. Sinuses are above your eyebrows and beside your nose. Now, over time, especially with continued exposure, you can get mold spores trapped in your sinuses. Now, contrary to popular belief, mold does not continue to typically grow inside of your body. Mold grows on organic substances out in nature. It does not typically grow in your body. There are some exceptions. There have been cases of mold growing inside of the nasal passages and sinuses. That is true. However, it's usually repeated exposure to mold on a daily basis or even every couple days when you're at work maybe. Important to look at that. Ventilation, what's behind the drywall, old carpets. All of those things can be mold exposure at the gym, etc. So, although you can harbor some mold spores and it can grow, it is usually continue and repeat exposure. This is why we need to get rid of the source that we're being exposed to. Now, one of the reasons why people believe that mold can grow in the body is because, let's call it a cousin of mold, is yeast or candida. And that can proliferate in the body, but in a different way. That is more organic to the body. We naturally have yeast in the body. It can just overgrow, or more pathogenic forms can grow in more of the natural-based forms place. So important to look at that. The next one, going back to not just the nose or lungs, but overall respiratory-based infections. Are you someone that gets chronic sinus infections, bronchitis, maybe even pneumonia over and over? Well, is it due to chronic inflammation in those areas? Chronic congestion where you can't get the mucus to actually flow. Everything is so blocked up that it creates infections, because those white blood cells and the pathogens that they are killing stay locked in one area, which is allowing that bacteria to fest. That creates then true respiratory infections. All right, the second to last one is a compromised immune system. I had this as well. When I was 17 years old, couldn't figure out what was wrong with my immune system. I had mold. It wasn't the only thing I had. I had a whole lot of other things going on as well, but nobody looked to check in the mid-90s. Nobody looked to check. And so what happens over time, whether it's food sensitivities, it's viruses, it's gut permeability, it's parasites, yeast, SIBO, H. pylori, etc., is that the immune system is chronically attacking things that shouldn't be in the body. And when this happens, your immune system over time gets overwhelmed. That rain barrel has begun to overflow. And now your immune system is depleted in some areas like Th1, right, immune cells, and it's hypersensitive in Th2, which is what I was. So you're chronically inflamed, yet things like secretory IgA can drop. Mine was a 0. No one should have a 0 for secretory IgA, because IgA is immunoglobulin A. It is your first line of defense against viruses and bacteria. So there's no wonder why I was getting sick every 2 weeks from the end of October through April, every single year. Sinus infection after sinus infection after sinus infection. And all the doctors did was just continue to give me Z-Pak after Z-Pak after Z-Pak. And yes, I got better. But guess what? Then I got sick again 2 weeks later. And the cycle just continued to repeat itself because they never looked for the underlying root cause. So very important that we look at that with autoimmune-based issues. The last one is chronic fatigue. So there's the reason why I haven't written a book on chronic fatigue, because I had Addison's disease or chronic fatigue or chronic immunodeficiency syndrome. You have to understand myalgic encephalomyelitis, they all go back to the same thing. Your body is exhausted, but it's exhausted because you have a compromised immune system. And you have a compromised immune system because you're massively inflamed. But why are you massively inflamed? Okay, it all stems from what is your underlying root cause. Most of the time, it is a stealth pathogen like we just spoke about. H. pylori, parasites, candida overgrowth, SIBO, leaky gut, heavy metals, mold, or viruses. There are more, but that's what I see in my practice over and over and over. Okay, there's mineral deficiencies, there's vitamin deficiencies, there's all sorts of different things. Don't get me wrong, there's more. There's plastics from the environment, there's glyphosate, so there's more. But what we need to do is not just we don't try to solve chronic fatigue. There's no solving chronic fatigue. That's why I didn't get better for 10 years, because I was trying to take the herbs and the whatever to boost my energy levels. And again, I'm not against that in the short term, but there has to be a plan to say, all right, I'm fatigued because I'm chronically inflamed. I'm chronically inflamed because I have this immune-based issue. I have this immune-based issue because I have X, Y, and Z. When you find out what X, Y, and Z are, and then you truly go after rebalancing those, then the fatigue takes care of itself. It's why when I met my mentor at 27 years old, it took me a long time, I know, but I learned a lot in the process, so I'm very grateful for that, is that I got better in 6 months. I get better in 6 months. Yes, I was doing a lot along the way. It wasn't that I don't want to downplay that in any way. But I had a plan. And the plan was, oh, these are the 3 main things that you need to work on. And as I worked on those, I got a little better each and every week. Not all better, but a little better each and every week. And then all of a sudden, I was better. How did that happen? Was it magic? Was it a miracle? No, it wasn't. It was based on always looking for why your rain barrel is overflowing. How did you fill it up? What are you most sensitive to? And then working on those big rocks. Use the big needle movers, not the small ones, which are basically what I call the icing on the cake. So hopefully this was helpful. 7 main symptoms to look for mold toxicity. I'll be doing many more shows on mold. I have many more. We'll link those up here today at stephencabral.com/2839. Please leave a comment below if you have additional questions. Would love to hear from you, or especially if you overcame mold. And then if this show is helpful in any way, please do feel free to share it with anyone you believe it could serve. Take care, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning into today's show. Before you go, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I want to make sure that you're getting our daily content, not missing out on anything. Functional medicine, wellness, weight gain, weight loss, anti-aging, living longer, stronger, and all of the most cutting-edge research. And if there's any topics you want to hear, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Take care.